And we're live. There we go. Okay, so episode 45, Mr. David Kelley. I made the little blurb like I always do for my episodes. Generates on the Facebook post and the little YouTube thing and all that, and try to tell folks about my guest. And we were talking when David messaged me pictures. He gave me two choices, a person or a lizard, and I was like, "No, man, it's totally up to you." And he chose lizard, so he went zebra skink, and so um, I was super stoked to hear about that, and put that in the blurb, and then mentioned amphibians. Your Instagram's full of ton of super cool amphibians, and then we were literally talking before I clicked the live button about going on vacation and checking out different zoos and different things. So I'm particularly interested to hear about that one because I had my own nerd connection to one of the pictures that you posted.
Yeah.
But no, so originally I was super stoked on the zebra skinks, and then I was really interested to see all the random amphibians and stuff that you posted. So um, what does your collection look like, and how is that? Obviously, your name on Instagram is the newtist, so I assume there's quite a bit of reference there. But what does that look like currently?
It's been through like quite a few different evolutions. When I started my own collection back when I was in college, it was almost entirely snakes, Australian pythons mostly, and then it became a lot of geckos and Australian pythons. And a couple of years ago, I really slimmed down once I entered into the professional zoo world, just because I thought maybe I don't want to have a big collection at home. Maybe I want to do a smaller collection. And I got rid of a lot and just kept a couple different species at that point. At that time, I had a Australian tree skinks, which I actually ended up trading for zebra skinks. And now it's kind of built back up to its current stage, which is generally species that can either take it very hot or take it very cold. I like animals that can take both those extremes. It's a little less stress inducing should a weather event happen, or if I'm out of town and a bulb burns out or something. So
Okay.
generally right now it's snake wise, it's rubber boas, northwestern garter snakes, diamond pythons, jungle carpets, coastal carpets, children's pythons, um, Egyptian egg-eating snakes, variable king snakes, and then lizard-wise, it is I have 3 pairs of zebra skinks, and then various babies from this year that are, still haven't sold. Leachianus, crescent geckos, gargoyle geckos, Peter's banded skinks, Tanzanian velvet geckos, and then there's the amphibians, which I kind of dove headlong into because, as I started missing geckos, I kind of realized that, a newt's basically a gecko that's dumber and more personable and always visible. So I got a lot of them, and it's nice not having to pay a heating bill, putting bulbs over a bunch of cages. So
sure.
I have some pygmy newts, Danube crested newts, Azerbaijan newts, blue swordtails, Spanish rib newts. I'm trying to think what else. A lone alpine newt that I was just kind of raising up to see if I enjoyed. Long-toed salamanders, tiger salamanders, firebelly toads, which I cannot talk enough about. They're just fascinating. And then of all things, African clawed frogs. I really like African clawed frogs for some reason. But,
See, man, I think those are cool. Like I'm very into. So there was, or I believe there still is, a restaurant in extreme southern Illinois in a town called Alton that had fish tanks in the wall, and basically all they did was keep quote unquote pet store fish species, but allow them to grow to what they should have been in the wild, which typically was insane. And it wasn't insane in the context of if you just saw it in a river or a pond, but you're used to seeing a 3-inch version in a fish tank, and so it looked crazy. And I've always thought of clawed frogs in that context of, boy, I bet it'd be super cool if you had like plants and some leaf litter and some, the water had some tannins to it, or just like that'd be really cool. Like I'm fascinated by, and I mentioned this in the little blurb, collections like yours, where you you started out mentioning that you are partial to animals that can handle a wide array of temperatures, and then snakes, lizards, and amphibians, regardless, you just listed off, with a few exceptions,
Yeah.
a whole bunch that can take it cold, and that for the most part, for quite a few things you listed, do better, cooler than one would think. Outside of Egypt and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that is very interesting, because as I was going through your social media and looking at your stuff, and you had success with something like zebra skinks, kind of off the wall, like not a really commonly seen thing. I was really excited to see that and wanted to hear all about it. And then I see your collection, and it is somewhat eclectic, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's kind of how that goes, where like
Yeah.
it seems to be a trend for folks that people refer me to, or that I find in my wanderings around social media, of, oh, this dude had success with zebra skinks, it's really cool, and he posts these pictures, his baby is super awesome, you don't really see that, and you're like, oh wow, okay. And then you look at it and like, oh, and it turns out your collection is different. It's, you had broad exposure to Australian pythons and Australian, all these things that, oh yeah, okay, I know that, more complete carpet python book just came out, like a pretty common ish, more mainstream thing. And then you list out your current collection, and it's like, well, Australian stuff, yeah, that's pretty mainstream. Diamonds and Bredls, and like, it's really cold. That's weird. It's like, oh yeah, well, he's just super into amphibians too. Oh, really? Like dart frogs? No, little slimy ones that you can freeze. What? Like, I I just find that you tend to see that, like, oh, this person had success in this one thing, and you're like, oh, that's really interesting. And it's like, oh yeah, but it turns out that all of it's interesting, and then it's these little tendrils. Like, how did you what was the progression there of, is it you just, oh, you were saying that newts kind of fit the gecko theme, and it was just your style of keeping that led you to the little facets that you kind of are all stuck in now, or how did that develop?
Um, Let me go back 1 second, because I realized I left the tortoises out of the collection too. Because I've also
True.
got the Russian tortoises that
Oh,
get
I
really,
would have got there, don't worry. I'm an Instagram stalker, I love your
yeah,
stuff, so I've seen a
Egyptian
bunch of your
tortoise.
pictures.
Yeah, the pancake tortoises are the only ones that really don't get that cold. But uh, yeah, I'd say it started off again with the carpet pythons, and I held my buddy Josh Easter brought one of his first generation Valle bloodline diamonds to a show. This big 6.5, 7 foot animal that was pretty old. I was just holding that animal going, what in the world? This is so cool. And then just starting to read about it and learn that, not only are they cold tolerant, but, males have been known to shiver like a female on eggs during the wintertime to keep warm. And for some reason, that really stuck with me. I don't know why. But
Because it's awesome.
yeah, the thought of a reptile, because, you're growing up and you're used to Komodo dragons, all these other big tropical animals where, you got to bake them, you got to get them hot. And then you hear about animals that go the opposite, like a spotted turtle, with a frozen pond and it's just someone underneath it, or a diamond python shivering like a female on eggs. And I don't know, for some reason, it really impressed upon me just how cool, no pun intended, some reptiles could be. So once I got the house I'm currently in, I was lucky enough to get a giant basement that I could just fill with
Okay,
whatever I
cool.
wanted to. And it became more about like, well, the basement stays cool. Let's load it up with all the animals I always wanted to do, but I couldn't do in a 1 bedroom apartment on the second floor of a building. Um, that's where kind of things have ended up right now. I
Okay.
know it's kind of tapered off this year with acquisitions. I kind of got what I want. The rubber boas were kind of the final nail in the coffin of, I have my cold weather species. Now I'm ready to raise things up and let them go where they go. But yeah, I'd say it all started with that diamond python.
Very cool. So you said you had more than one pair of zebra skinks, and of course bunches of
Mhm.
babies, which are on your social media, which is super cool. Um, how so? They're pretty random. Like that's and you know the Peter's Bandits and it's they're not like lychees and different things. Those are pretty commonly kept. Um, Still have some weird, more eclectic ways about their keeping, but like, how do you end up like, oh, it turns out I'm really good at zebra skinks, or is it just more of a you enjoy them, so you're going to get them, and then it turned out that boys and girls make more, or did you intend to purchase a project, or how did you approach that?
Yeah. So it actually all started because of my old group of Australian tree skinks, the Gurney striolata. I'd had them for quite a while and done really well with them. And of course, they're another small social skink species.
Hmm.
So I was already partial to also cold weather and social skink species. Um, so I remember one day just realizing, I think back in like 2012, somebody introduced me to zebra skinks. And I was like, yeah, that's really cool. And perhaps my memory is fading, but I want to say they were pretty expensive at the time. And I seen like an ad on Fauna Classifieds and was like, I can't afford that right now. I'll look into that in the future. And just on a whim, in like February of 2020, I put a Facebook post up that was just like, whatever happened to zebra skinks? Where'd they go? And I ended up connecting with another keeper that actually wanted my Australian tree skinks and some part of the Matoa Toa that I was keeping at the time. So I actually worked out a trade, some of my animals for two pairs of zebra skinks. I was like,
Okay.
I'm like, it's time to try something new. These look really, really cool and fun. And from there, it just kind of took off by accident. You know, at first, I think what's so different about them is like the tree skinks. I love the tree skinks. They're awesome, but they were a little more skittish. They were a little more. You walk up to the cage and they just kind of freeze in place and see what you're doing. And if you try to tongue feed them, one or two might take something, but most of the time they just scattered. They vanish.
Okay.
Um, and with the zebra skinks, I really wasn't getting them for the purpose of sociability and interaction. But it got to the point where like my one male would like run over to the cage when it opened up and like meet me there to eat an earthworm or a cricket off tongs or something.
Wow.
And yeah, it's just something you don't expect. And then of course they're just beautiful. I mean, males and females. Um,
Yes, they're
so I
super
got
cool.
so I got my first two pairs and just kept them for past 2 years, hoping to breed them. And the third pair, I actually got a group from somebody, and
Okay.
I just raised some babies up to get some new blood in. And it, I have one female that I affectionately refer to as the baby maker because she not only had a massive litter of 10 in July, but she had a double litter of 4. I want to say end of September, beginning of October, which just bizarre. I didn't expect that. You certainly don't see that very often.
Sure.
Um, and ever since then, I don't know, just enjoying them, enjoying having this little personable social skink that stays out in the open and interacts with you.
For sure. Now, is there any particular approach? Do you crank her up more calcium? Do you vitamin dose? How do you approach that? Knowing, I mean, obviously the first litter was pretty gigantic, but then unexpectedly it happens again. So like now, are we worried about calorie intake and calcium and things?
Sure.
Are you adjusting, or is everybody just kind of fed the same? And how are you dealing with that?
I always fed them a little more than I normally would feed a lizard of the same size, and that's just because they're always basking out in the sun. On that. I've got a layer or a tower of bricks that they can climb out up on top of, all the way to the top where it gets really hot, a little
Hmm.
cool underneath, a lot cooler at the bottom. So, and they're always up on top, just always baking themselves. So I was putting in food quite a bit, and maybe somebody else has had a success feeding less, but I was feeding like 4 or 5 times a week a different prey item, and I've kept doing that.
Okay.
I've never um, they'll eat anything. They truly are garbage disposals. So I just try to rotate through different healthy items. I like to feed a lot of mealworms, banded crickets, the very occasional waxworm. I'll do Rapashi Bluey Buffet every once in a while.
Okay.
Pangea actually every once in a while. They're not big fans of it, but they'll come and lick a little bit up. So for the variety, I like to offer it.
Oh, that's cool.
We've in Wichita, it's legal to have backyard chickens, so I'll hard boil some eggs every once in a while and crush those up, and the skinks go nuts. Which is
Really?
another way to get some calcium in there. You know, you just grind the shell and the egg up really nicely, and they come out and they feast on it. It's
Okay.
family units even cooler when you see both parents and all the babies sharing a big egg. So
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, I really haven't changed anything. As a matter of fact, the female never looked overly large either litter. So I was pretty blown away, the first
Really?
time. Well, so I shouldn't say she didn't look large the first litter. She had a little bit of some bulk to her, but if you had told
Okay.
me she was going to pop 10 out, I would have told you you're crazy, not to expect that. I might have thought 3 or 4. And the second
Wow.
litter, I had no idea at all. Not a single inclination, nothing in behavior change, nothing in girth change. So I don't know whether or not I have been feeding perhaps too much to where her body is like, all right, let's just keep cranking them. Which
Calories are here. Get them in use.
Yeah, in the wintertime, everything gets a cooling. Even if it's a hot weather species, I just make sure they don't cool as much as some other animals.
Okay.
They'll go in a basement or part of the basement where it doesn't drop below 60, but they're still getting those really nice daytime temps. So they naturally kind of slow down. So I'm just trying to make sure they're still getting a good variety while at the same time, maybe not calorie loading her by accident. I am
Okay.
kind of watching her a little bit. And if I start seeing any inclination that maybe she's not doing well, I'm going to pull the male. But I also have some slight worries about that just being a social species. What happens when you suddenly take a pair that's been together, separate them, and then have to reintroduce them?
Right.
Even that group of babies I raised up, I kept a pair back, and out of nowhere, the female just walked up, ripped part of the male's tail off, and that they had a social interaction, a little social hierarchy moment, despite the fact that they're being well fed. So there's always that chance of, could reintroductions result in an animal losing a foot or losing a tail. So as of right now, I'm just trying to monitor and kind of see what goes on there before I take any drastic.
Of course.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, like, obviously we are keeping them in captivity, so we're responsible for them. But like it happens. Like,
yeah.
It's one of those like, oh, that sucks. Like I would never purposely like dangle his tail in there to let her bite it. Like, don't be an idiot. But you're keeping a large colonial, social group of animals, and then sometimes we got to sort some stuff out. And they literally have lizard brains, and that's how it gets sorted out. Like that's, it I think some people probably do struggle with some of those things a little bit. I listened to another podcast called Project Herpeticulture, and they keep a wide variety of species. And one of the guys on there, Philip, he keeps Uromastyx, and he's dead set that he keeps individually. And his purpose on that, puts them together for breeding, temperature cycles, so on and so forth. Because he struggles when keeping them together because they squabble, not constantly, but often enough that they're trying to hash things out. Basically when she's saying no and he's saying yes, she usually has to forcefully say no, and then it doesn't always go well. And they had a guest on recently who was talking and essentially advocating for the exact opposite, and was like, no, just keep them together all the time, let them hash it out, do lizard stuff, and it's one of those things where like, you keeping a species that has these social hierarchies and social interactions, like that's a pretty hard struggle to be like, if I could just keep it perfectly and they'll live forever And I don't, because there are pets and you don't want bad stuff to happen, but then you keep them together in this group and see all of these behaviors and see all these things happen. It's like, oh, well, I want that too. Like they obviously
Yeah.
are meant to do that too. Like, that would be a hard balance to strike of, you know, doing that well, I suppose.
Yeah, and with that litter of 10 babies, it was really cool. There was like a moment in their development where all of a sudden tails just started getting nipped and pulled um, willy nilly, and I kind of had that moment of like, oh man, that kind of sucks. I don't want to have a bunch of lizards that have been damaged, and I want to take care of them. I want them to look good.
Right.
But there's also that moment of, well, they're meant to do that. That's their life. So I let it go, and sure enough, they kind of settled it out. They had who was the alpha and kind of who was lower on the tier, and it was over after that. They didn't really mess with each other anymore, and I think they're healthier for it than rather than being pulled and kept individually or in smaller groups. And I think it's good for their. Well, I'm getting into speculative keeping here at this point, but I've just got to imagine that if zebra skinks in the wild, they stay with their family for a little while.
Sure.
I mean, it's got to be good for their development, at least I would imagine. Stay with their family, squabble it out. You might lose a toe here and there, or you might lose a tail tip, but I think that's just part of it.
Well, and you've got to think, to me, that we get very worried about stress in reptiles,
Mm-hmm.
as we should. But most reptiles are prey species, right? And so stress becomes cumulative for them and they look great. And then all of a sudden they die. And we have our stupid mammal brains and are like, I don't know what happened. Like sudden reptile death. It's like a really common thing because of that. And a little bit of that, I do wonder, is because it's pristine and perfect and there's
Yep.
one and it's been kept in the best lizard thing or snake thing ever in the history of lizards and snake things, and then this one stupid thing happens where it got down to 52 in your house that night and it died, and it's like, you're telling me a lizard or a snake or a frog or a whatever that's from the wild
Yeah.
can't get cold on a Tuesday in October? Like what, and I think, or I would assume it has to play some factor into it of just of resilience, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
those baby skinks, you hash it out, get a little stressed out when you're babies, you lose a tail tip or whatever. Turns out they're built for that. It's not a big deal. It's mostly fat and water, and nobody cares about your tail. Like,
Yeah.
there's a reason that you see lizard species and they seem to just not care about it. It's like, how could you lose a toe and just keep on walking? It's like, well, because it's a lizard, dude. Like lizards, that's their thing, and I would assume, and of course, like super species dependent and situation dependent, and yada yada. But it would make sense that their systems are built to be resilient to those things. Just given your basic observations, right? 10 of them popped out and they didn't just scatter like cockroaches. They all hang out. It's like, okay, well, that makes sense to them. So then that should be what they're doing. All right. So how's that going to work out? Well, they got a little bit bigger and now we don't want to share the bugs. We're going to beat the crap out of each other a little bit. And had it progressed to death or some sort of serious injury or whatever, yeah, you jump in and put a stop to it. But like the fact that it petered out and then it's more or less gone, like should show people, like a little bit of stress, came back to homeostasis, cool,
Yeah.
So I
Well, yeah.
mean,
What you described, the pristine environment, I like to call bubble boy syndrome, where we keep the animals in this perfect little box that we bleach or chlorhex once a week, and all this stuff, and then a light breeze goes through your room and they get some respiratory infection and dies. So yeah, I know what you're talking about. I like, aside from the sociality of those skinks where they kind of have to interact and they'll not beat on each other, but they kind of have to work through some stuff.
sure,
Aside from that, I like to keep everything to a level where there are not extremes, temperature variations throughout the year. Maybe it gets a little warmer in the summer, but you know what? It's an African skink that lives on the grassland. That heat's going away at nighttime. It's going to get a little cooler.
Sure.
So that basement's going to go to 60, 55 on some nights, and they're going to live with it. I really haven't met a lot of reptiles that can't get to that level of temperature, even a little lower potentially. And yeah, with the skinks, particularly with their social well-being, as they got a little older, it did get to a point where one actually had some scales taken off of its cheek. And I know that was the point where I was like, all right,
Oh, wow.
we've reached another level where, there's a little more damage than I was anticipating. So that's when I started breaking them up. So
Sure.
I would say if anybody's planning on working with zebra skinks, you do have to watch it. And I'm trying to think about what size they'd be. Maybe 3 inches. There's a point where the males get to slowly start getting that kind of orange coloration that starts popping up on their their ventral surfaces. About right then is when I started separating them. And I think had it not been for 10 of them together, it wouldn't have gotten to that level.
Right.
And I actually didn't even notice it until I was getting them all out to move them and go like, oh, okay, you can go in this tub, you can go in this tub. But yeah, I'd say there should be some caution taken because they are territorial as they get older. But when they're that small, they just got to be a lizard and they got to work through their own little differences.
Well, and I mean, even your observation there, it's like, oh, you mean when boys start to have boy parts, they get annoying? Yeah, I mean, and it is it is one of those things of this is captivity, and their space is finite, given that, and so some part of their whatever their scope of intellect may be is relegated to where I'm at, the resources that are in this place, and how I can get them and who takes them away. And super basic math of life things. Yeah, and I mean, just given the fact that we are keeping them in a finite space, like that is, at some point, the math is going to dictate that. Like, I'm starting to feel like a dude, and you look a little bit like a dude, and I'm about tired of that. And in the wild, I would bite you, and you would run away, and there's a forever to run to. There isn't 50 inches or whatever. So yeah, I mean that's that's just the part of being the keeper, which makes perfect sense. That it is the cool part I find about that is that it gives you the opportunity to see those things, though. Of so many of those things are kind of not really anecdotal, but like I don't keep them, but I've kept different things and have a pretty good understanding. And so I kind of assume all the things that you said that mates up with what I would assume for a social skink species. But no, to have that observation of, yeah, they're little, hash it out, then we're cool for a while. Well, then we see sex characteristics, that's not cool anymore, and then we got to figure, like, you actually are starting to set metrics of these things, having that experience. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think my other pair has not bred yet, and I'm kind of grateful for that, just for the fact that I can the next time around I can say, all right, we're right before that stage. I think it's time we start splitting everybody up. And
Sure.
Which, speaking of her, I was a little bummed about her this year. I really thought I was gonna get her to breed as well, but I found an infertile ova randomly in the bottom of their tank. So hopefully next year we'll have a couple of different litters and offer unrelated animals. But
wow,
so far only one female. So, and I have a hard time believing one female can double litter, and means that I'm not doing something right where the other female wouldn't breed. So hopefully it's just a matter
sure.
of time and adjustment period.
Is there because you got different groupings at different times, could it be an age thing where maybe she is simply more mature than they are? Is there a potential there for that to be the case?
it the two pairs I originally got looked almost identical in size and build.
Okay.
So I believe the first two pairs I first purchased or acquired rather are roughly the same age.
Okay.
I should actually confirm that with the guy I got them from. The third female, on the other hand, much younger. She's only 9, 10 months old, so not too unexpected that she wouldn't produce. But
Okay.
yeah, the other female, I'm hoping it's just a matter of kind of acclimation. Since I got them, I've moved to a new place, so they got shipped their first year, and of course that was the year of the pandemic. So my brain wasn't on lizards that year, so I'm not surprised nothing happened that year.
Sure.
But then the next year I moved, so I'm hoping it's just a matter of kind of settling in for her.
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Like that, and especially, I mean, big changes like that could even explain your on it, that second group of four. Like
Yeah.
big swings like that aren't always negative swings. Sometimes there was a big swing and she had a hormone spike and was like, oops, four more, like that's
Yeah. There you
um
go.
yeah, swings in those things are just that. They're swings. We don't really necessarily know how those will result. Um s- we were you said something earlier about pristine and it made me think of it. Um I suck at keeping amphibians. And when I see the types of amphibians that you keep, it makes me think. It makes me think of that. Like I'm going to keep it perfect, and then one thing is going to happen, and they will all die. And and but it makes me think that because you stereotypical amphibian keeping to most of us is tropical, and then of course we know that that's not necessarily true because especially in North America, all these different things there are a gajillion different examples of salamanders and things that get very cold. Um, but then for somebody like me who has very limited success with amphibians, it's like Pac-Man frogs and toads. Like not nothing fancy. Um, to me, your species choices would scare me to death because it has
Really?
to be perfect, and they're going to get cold. Don't worry, they're supposed to get cold. And then I'm sitting there like, no, they're not. They're going to die. You're trying to freeze them, And then you have like rubber boas, and the last one of my friends that has rubber boas puts his in a wine fridge at
Yeah.
like 40 degrees where there's frost on the thing, and the
Mhm.
snake is looking around like I will totally bite you and eat right now. I don't care that there's fraud. Like it's the most ridiculous crap ever. But it like is that do you for one thing, do you find that to be a challenge? And if is that where you're like this is cool, you got to keep them cold. Like it seems like a very specific or delicate process. Do you find it that way or you just like you got buckets in your basement and it works? Like how does that come about for you with that it would seem to be a very strange way of keeping cold things?
Um, well, I'll be honest. When I started keeping amphibians, I was terrified. I was like, "Man, I'm gonna kill every one of these." I am, um, but I am fortunate through work where I've gotten to work with a bunch of amphibian species. So I kind of got my trial by fire through my profession. So when it came to working at home, I was kind of already a little bit of aware of how to keep some of them, and I learned it's really easy. For the species I've chosen. That is, there's definitely more delicate animals out there that I'm not gonna pretend like every single one of them is bulletproof, and you can just, neglect or throw a filter on and say perfect. No, I picked a lot of pond style newts where the water can
Okay.
be just a little bit off, but for the most part they can be fine. Um, no, it is definitely a challenge, and it's definitely something where you know during the summertime, we had a period where it was like 111 outside. And, even in
Whoa.
my basement, it gets a little warmer down there. So I was temp gunning. and my one newt wall was at like 75, and I'm like, oh man, it's gonna be bad. What am I gonna do? Thankfully, nothing went wrong. The temperature swing at night was enough that things leveled out.
Okay.
But no, it can be stressful. There are all those moments where, oh man, I'm going to lose everything if it gets too hot, or species of the genus Nerurgus, the Middle Eastern newts. They like very clean water, very fast water, and very cold water. So
Okay.
when it comes to those, I definitely always have a little bit of an apprehension that, the filter goes out in the water quality tanks and I lose one. Or if the water gets too hot, I'm going to lose one. But so far, everything's been going well enough that I can comfortably say keeping newts and other amphibians is incredibly rewarding. I will say, when you mentioning cold weather stuff that does stress you out, what stressed me out the most was the Russian tortoises in the wine chiller last year, because I had them at 42, and I could still hear them just like scraping the sides, like trying and I got them down very slowly to 34 degrees in the wine cooler before they finally stopped moving. They started just relaxing and sleeping.
Right.
That scared me half to death. You don't think a tortoise should be at 34, but that's been the most frightening moment so far in the cold weather temperate animal kind of career.
Very cool. I don't have the guts currently, but I keep currently this space is in Pennsylvania, but I live in Illinois, and I'm able to keep some tortoise species and things outside in the summertime. And my wife and I do educational shows, so that's our jam. And I keep Russians outside, and I just let the grass grow, and I love it. It when you take pictures and do things like that, it looks like what I think it should look like, right? It's literally a little tan grass colored tortoise going through grass. Like, it looks perfect. And I have friends, and they're like, "Look, man," because I'm one of those idiots. Like, I have a giant garden, and I dig holes in my backyard, cut trees down. I don't care. Um, a couple of my friends like, okay, so we're gonna dig down 4 feet, right? And because I'm also obsessed with legless lizards of all kinds,
Oh, fantastic.
and I love using Russians in shows for kids, because when you first show it to a kid, they're like, oh, it's a snake, obviously, and then you go through the whole teaching point of it, and they are so perfect to show. Like, if you actually just look at their head, ignore the fact of the snake type body, just look at their head, it's like, oh, it's a skink. Like, it's so obvious. And when you're teaching kids who don't really know a whole lot at all, like, those super basic things, they definitely have like aha moments with them.
Yeah.
They're awesome. So my thing with those is I just want to get a ton of them, because I understand importation and things like that and so on and so forth, but I really wish people would produce things like that, because like, we do great with North American stuff, right? North American rat snakes, North American turtles, like we've done wonderful breeding those things. And then you look at temperate and cold weather things from other parts of the world, and it's like, well, why can't we just do that? Like, it's like,
Yeah.
why do we breed black rat snakes and then not Russian rat snakes? Like, they look like really big black rats. Like, I don't get it. And so I'm like, dude, so we're gonna dig down 4 feet, and I'm gonna make a hibernaculum, and I'm gonna get like a barrel of Russian tortoises and a barrel of Sheltopusik, and then we're gonna freeze them, but not really, in my backyard. And then like, that's my pipe dream for people that live in places where it gets cold. So I I'm super fascinated with how you keep. I just don't currently have the guts to do it. You you were talking about a lot of the Middle Eastern newts are fast, clean, cold. Like they have pretty specific water requirements, and I've heard that quite a bit from other folks. Are you um, are you a pretty simple keeper? Do you like just get hardcore, super nice filters? Or like how do you approach that? Of because I originally came from I did this in college. I was really into saltwater and reptiles for them and to help with greenhouse, and so I was much more exposed to the equipment side and on the plant side and the reef side and fish and things like that. Um, almost all of your investment is in equipment, and then you buy $1,000 lights to grow weeds from Africa, like things like that, or like coral and little fish that no one cares about where they're from, but we think are the coolest thing ever. I had to invent LEDs or what, just insane things for fish. Um, when it comes to the amphibian side of the house, are you pretty simplistic? Are you giganto filter crazy setups? Like how do you approach that?
It so far it depends. For all my larger newts, my adults, I get very nice filters. At least, in my opinion, very nice filters. I'm a sucker for the Eheim brand aquatic filters. There's just something about them that I like the flow rate. I like how their ability to keep a tank clean, basically under almost any circumstance. Also, it really reduces the amount of water changes I have to do to, where I'm not breaking my back lifting a bucket halfway across the basement.
Sure.
As far as the tank setup, I'd say a lot of my salamanders are pretty simplistic tubs right now, or tanks right now. And that's less of what I want and more of just I'm raising them up. I kind of want to, as I'm raising them, to keep them in the most simple, easily viewed, easily checked on setup possible. As
Sure.
they've been getting bigger, I'm getting plants, mostly just Java fern, hornwort, the easy growing plants. Because I have a terrible black thumb. I kill plants, so I want the easiest aquatic plants. And I keep them, I'm starting to keep them a little more naturalistic.
Okay.
So I know, like for some of my species, it's as simple as those bricks with like 3 holes in them. They
Hmm.
kind of and just stack them up, and then fill it up with water, and the newts can hide in the bricks. The water's flowing, and just do a 20% water change twice a week. Boom, done. That's it. No substrate, no nothing.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
and then others, as they're older, they're more confident. Some of them, a lot of the newts I keep will actually just come up and tongue feed for you, which is incredibly nice if you want to get
That's cool.
eyes on everybody. That's actually one of the other reasons that drew me to salamanders. Imagine if all your geckos that are shy and hiding would come out running to you to eat off tongs.
Right.
So once they're older and a little more confident, they'll just come to you. I just plant it up and stick maybe a quarter of a worm on some tongs, hold it in the water. Somebody swims out. I'm like, all right, you're good. All right, you're good. And that's when I like to plant things up and make it look nicer. And most of my animals are coming to maturity, so that's when things are going to be switching more over to that natural setup.
Right.
I'm getting to the point where I want to walk downstairs and see beautiful aquariums with nice filters just lining all the walls. And it's I don't mind some utilitarianism kind of in those tanks. I might not take the bricks out. They're very nice. They're very easy. They're convenient for a reason.
Sure.
Same with my
Well, and
zebra.
if it's helpful for the animals, I mean
Yep.
that's
Going back to zebra skinks, they've got a bioactive substrate, isopods, springtails, live plants. But those bricks are such a nice way of letting the animal bask without
of
relying
course.
on. If I was to do an actual display tank in a living room, I'd use some slate rocks. But for a herp room where nobody else is going down but me, I'd rather not rely on rocks that can shift and accidentally crush a skink or
Yeah, of
something.
course. Yes.
So the same thing with the salamanders. But yeah, so far that's sort of the way I have things set up. For some of the terrestrial ones, I gotta love this new trend of all the different Tupperware companies making Tupperware with those little gaskets on the top that just kind of seal
Mm-hmm.
things in place. They have made keeping terrestrial salamanders so much nicer. No more worried about humidity or, contrary to what some people may think. My goodness, can terrestrial salamanders climb a completely vertical wall without any sort
Yes.
of effort?
Yes, they can.
So having them locked in place where they can't get out is incredibly nice. And I'll just do actually pine bark chips of all things, pure pine bark chips, no blend or anything. I think
Okay.
they're called pine bark nuggets at Lowe's, and a mix of organic potting soil, topsoil, and just a little sand for drainage, and a drainage layer so that. And I try to make it to where one end is wetter than the other, so the animal can kind of go back and
Okay.
forth whether or not it wants to be drier or wetter. I do not offer water bowls. The humidity is so high in there. A lot of the salamanders aren't going in there. For firebelly toads, that's a very different story. I do offer them a water bowl. It seems to help them out to have something to jump in and fully submerge themselves in as I'm raising them up.
Okay.
So,
Very cool.
yeah.
And then in the chat, Christian Parr says, "Let's be honest, the coolest animals in his collection are the jungles."
I think he's referring to my jungle carpet pythons. I have a pair that I got from my friend Josh Easter a couple years ago, and I think they're a couple years ago is a bit of exaggeration. I think I got them in 2014, 2015. They're how old are they? 10, 11 years old now, maybe 12.
Awesome.
They're still fluorescent yellow, that jet black.
Mhm.
They're actually back to Casey Lazzik's old bloodlines, so they have that old school jungle look to them.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Like I said, I'm still a sucker for Australian pythons. But
So, we were talking before we went live here, and I was saying how there are a lot of folks in herpetoculture who work in the zoological field.
Mhm.
Not necessarily from a, like you were saying, filters and things for amphibians, and you have some exposure at work and things like that. But how do you think, like being in the zoological profession, does that color your perception of how you want to build a collection? So I mentioned on your social media posts you went on vacation, saw a whole bunch of zoos. I do quite a bit of the same thing when I travel. I like to see what everybody else is doing, who's building what, or if they have different things and so on and so forth. Do you think, like, has a professional exposure to, oh, here's everything that's available,
Yeah.
does that make it harder for you to say, oh, I'd like to have rubber boas at home, or I like Australian carpet pythons, or whatever? Or does that let you look at every single thing that no one can get and be like, I like those four things? Like, do you think that has an impact on, like, your professional side, have an impact on home, or you just do two separate jams?
That's a great question. I'd say the first part of that is working in the profession has ruined me because I do want everything. Uh, Having exposure to everything makes me go, oh my goodness, I want everything. Actually, I never thought I'd say it, but one of my now, if it was legal in Kansas and I could do it, montane rattlesnakes would be here as well. I'm obsessed with montane rattlesnakes now. But
Do you
yeah,
notice a trend that you just like cold stuff?
oh, I very
Right?
much do.
Okay. You seem like a sleeps with the air conditioner kind of dude, just from what I'm hearing here.
Absolutely. But yeah, it has made me open my eyes a lot more to what I keep. Before I
Okay.
was very happy just having a room of rack systems and Australian pythons, and now part of me is like, I'm not sure I'll ever be happy if I don't have a little bit of everything. And that's where a lot of this has come from. I want I want a couple salamanders. I want a couple frogs. I want a couple lizards. I've got my staple species I can never get rid of. But I think there is just something different to be said about keeping a couple species of all of those, where you're learning more as a keeper, and perhaps even being able to take some of that and attribute it to other species or other genera, or even rather higher taxa. I think I lost my train of thought there. But yeah. I'd say the other part of that is working in that profession. It does make me want to work with maybe certain animals less. If I'm very heavily involved with certain species at work, I might come home and say, I don't really want to do that. It's maybe a little bit too much like work at home. I want to do something a little different.
Sure.
And then other animals are just so amazing that I want to do both. Egyptian tortoises are a good example. And then the other hardest part is that by traveling to all these different zoos, you'll see something that you're like, what in the world? Why is that there? I've never even seen that species before. And it makes you completely rethink, like, wow, do I really want to work with that species? Or do I want to work with that new species I just saw? And that's the downside, is that you get so excited and see so many new things that I think sometimes I get ADHD. And my lovely girlfriend will sometimes stop and go like, come on, what are you doing? Like, you don't need that right now. Later, put it on the list.
Yeah. I get it. I get that for sure.
But the other part of that is it makes me appreciate the stuff that was more common or is common.
Okay.
When you're not keeping, I'm trying to think out how to word this. When you're working with animals that for the sake of animals, you're not looking at it from a monetary perspective. You're looking at it for how cool the animal is in itself. We were talking about Xenopus before we started the show.
Mm-hmm.
Working in the professional zoo fields, just look at an animal for what it is and go, man, that's cool. Imagine if a Xenopus was the size of a bus and it was roaming the wild. It would be terrifying. It'd be the scariest thing in the world. And then to watch that thing in an aquarium suck down an earthworm like it's nobody's business, it's like, what? Why is that so cool? It kind of gives you a better perspective for some of those more common species. Firebelly toads too. If you had told me that firebelly toad that I passed over growing up, and saying I'll get that one day later, was one of the best species I've ever seen in my life, never would have believed you. But
for sure,
working in the field has made me realize just how cool they are, and now they're a forever species in our home. But yeah, I think I answered your question there. I got a little.
Yes. No. Yeah, absolutely. I'm always curious as to how it influences folks. Like on the green tree side, right? Like the Trooper Walshes of the world. The famous names from way back in the day did both. Like this, he was a green tree nerd and worked in a green tree nerd side at the zoo, and then when he came home, he was a green tree nerd. Like those type of things. And then you'll run across folks that go to work with big mammals or something just not hobby related in any way. And so then when they come home, a hobby is a hobby. It's different from work. I don't work with animals at all. So when I come home, it's hobby related. I'm just always interested in how that colors your approach to something that is a hobby because you do it professionally, right? Like people always make fun of that, like mechanics drive crappy cars because they get paid to make somebody else's car nice. Like I just get my car to get me to the shop. Like it doesn't make me any money, because it's not a hobby, it's a profession. It's treated differently, mentally by people, how they compartmentalize things. But then this is one of those hobbies where your views in your profession and the things that you see and like, oh, these dudes set up this filter and this is super cool. And, I heard about this light company or whatever, can have humongous impacts on how you do your hobby, because then you have preferences and you like this or you saw that or had exposure and things. Like Christian here in the chat again was saying, does seeing all the incredible enclosures in all the zoos make you want to keep your animals the same way at home, which you were talking about just a little bit ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Man, there is nothing. I need to clarify this by saying there is nothing wrong with rack systems or minimalist keeping. If you're keeping the animals right and they've got a shelter, proper ways to thermoregulate, hydrate, all that jazz, nothing wrong with it. Never going to knock it. Keep the animals the way you can keep them. That being said, yes, I look at some of my animals and go, wouldn't that be so cool if I could just do this giant enclosure right here, and maybe there's a misting system on this half and it gets a little wetter and grow those plants. Yeah, it becomes an obsession.
Sure.
I actually had a dream for a while. Unfortunately, it sounds like some of the Kansas reptile keeping laws for natives are going to change. But at the time, I was having this dream of kind of turning an office room into having all the different Kansas natives, maybe one or two displayed in enclosures.
I am obsessed with enclosures like that. I've seen them at different zoos for different habitats, and they are amazing.
Yes, and some of the native species are so underrated. Little Decay's brown snakes. I am not trying to be a hipster or ridiculous when I say it's the best pet snake you'll ever have. And
yeah, ringnecks, decays, yeah.
Yeah.
They're little, they eat worms. Any kid can keep them because we all did as kids. Yeah, for sure. Yes. Dude, the area that you are in, if you made like a big, and it wouldn't even really have to be that deep. You could just do length of like, a prairie setup.
Yeah.
You could do rat snakes, rattlesnakes, decay. Like there's a million species that could fit into those things. And my thing is on the zoological side, I don't work in that, but the part of that I took away that I like for my enclosures is it's storytelling is landscaping and presentation, and there's so much more to it than just the animal in the box, right? It's conservation based and telling stories, and there's a whole lot of other things that go into the professional side of that thing. But I think herpeticulture, we miss that for stuff that is from here. Yes. Like we build baller dart frog setups, forest edge of Madagascar chameleon setups. When it's like, dude, Kansas prairie stuff is killer. Like rosy boas are from middle of nowhere Idaho, where all you really need is like one pine tree, but you can put snow in there. Like there's like ridiculous, like just so cool. I don't know if you follow them, but the Kansas Herpetological Society on Facebook, dude, they're super active. They go herping, they do population stuff, they help out with the state, and they find crazy stuff. Like their Facebook group is just a scrolling of crazy stuff that people find all the time.
Yeah, I have not been able to participate in their field trips just due to work and life. But no, and I post a lot of the field herp finds that I've found in that group, and I think you're dead right in that with the Native or North American animals, we don't give the same attention to. We don't kind of build those awesome enclosures, and it's kind of a shame because some of these animals come from such different habitats to where, again, decays, for example. If I go 2 hours west, it becomes a red earth prairie. If I go, an hour east, it becomes almost like a temperate forest that's kind of, wet. There's the typical like leaves on the ground. It's a forest. I can look at either of those and say, okay, which one do I want to tell the story of? The prairie, or do I want to tell the story of the temperate forest? And I get to play around with that. Or do I want to do a forest edge?
Or just get a really long one and do both.
That's right.
I'm always the dude that's like, well, plywood comes in 8-foot sheets, so if we had 3 of those, and oh yeah, man, you can get ridiculous. I want to see the person that is measuring in plywood sheets. They're garter snake ring neck decays enclosure, and I want to shake their hand. And if that person doesn't exist, I would like to be them.
Oh,
Like, just build ridiculous things for this stuff that is here, and people will think it's cool, and then tell them that you have 100 snakes in your basement and keep dragons or whatever. Like, dude, yeah, I
or
it would be so awesome.
even like rubber boas, whenever they just sit out in the open, and that's a perfect ability to have that North American display tank of
For
get
sure.
some pine logs and build it up to look like a forest. Screw them into the top of your tank if it's a front opening, and throw some pine needles down, and you've just got this weird rubbery snake sitting there in the open. Say like, look, you can find that in the wild. It's amazing. I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the chat is going around. So we have Brittany is a huge fan of the Egyptian tortoises. Eric is voting for the axolotls. Mike Stefani, as always, talking about creating beautiful habitats because his are so ridiculous. Um, yeah, and like Eric says, if leopard frogs were from Africa or Asia, people would lose their minds trying to get some. Yes,
Absolutely.
any number of those things, that we discount. The Herpeticulture Network folks, we all have a group chat, and quite a few of the folks in there have been posting garter snakes recently, and just the absurd variety of them
Mhm.
in different things. Or we're all definite nerds because we keep Nerodia and just ridiculous things that other
That's
people
cool.
don't
That's
keep.
really
But
cool.
but people hear those things and they're like, why do you keep Nerodia? And it's like, dude, just hear me out, because there's like a million of them. They are, and people discount how vast, not even North America, just the United States. Because if
Mhm.
you get into Mexico, it's amazing. We just can't
Oh
have
yeah.
any. We can't get any of it. Um, but like just the United States, people discount how vast that is. Or think you talk about rubber boas, right? Mountains, Idaho,
Mhm.
snow on the ground, ridiculous. They sit out because they're great at camouflage. All these weird things. Get down into rosy boas, and it's like, oh yeah, when you're talking about Californian king snakes in general, how there's like a gazillion different kinds. Well, it turns out, because that's how I teach, is rat snakes or king snakes. You can teach from California to South Carolina and show the progression of habitat in this country with king snakes. It's like, oh
Absolutely.
yeah, stripy ones to speckly ones. How'd you get there? And it's like, well, we drove from California through Texas and ended up in Florida. That's how we got there. Like, it's so many ridiculous things that you're able to do with that type of stuff. And then the issue being, they all get cold. They brumate in a
Mhm.
vast part of our country. But then finding a collection like yours where, like, oh, I am into Australian stuff, but I freeze them. I'm into amphibians, but only ones that it snows on. Like, that's very in mainstream herpeticulture, that would seem obscure, um, but it seems to be very fitting for a theme that kind of follows with your collection. But you do have outliers in
Mhm.
that, we were talking about Egyptian tortoises, you talked about egg-eating snakes, Peter's banded skinks, some other things. um, and I asked before about how
Yeah.
things colored your um, approach to your collection, and you do seem to have a theme. Things that have a cooling period, and live in a basement and so on and so forth. And then you do have some outliers that are very high heat animals, stereotypical desert type
Yeah.
pets and things. So how do those decisions come about for you? Because it would seem like, oh yeah, we're gonna go with alpine newts and some stuff that gets like, we can just do it all on this wall and not have to worry because everybody's the same. And then when you have these outliers, now you're starting to add complexity. you can't really keep them all together because then the tortoise lights are going to heat up the newts and those type of things. So logistics start to play in. So how are you making decisions as far as, oh, I'd like to try an African thing, and now I have to make space for hot stuff. Like how does that impact your collection?
Great question. So let me think. The Peters Banded Skinks are probably the easiest. Um, they are just such a weird little animal that, and I
Yes.
actually got them at my old apartment where it was a little bit warmer before I kind of was able to finally go to my dream of cold weather temperate species.
Okay.
But when I did go to this new place and I am able to follow that dream, um, at my old apartment, I kept them in Bavaria with UVB lights, with basking lights, and I wanted to see what they did. And I can tell you right now, I never once saw them come out and bask unless it got so cold that they had to get out there. And by so cold, I mean like drop down to like 60 at night as the season shifted before I could kind of adjust lighting and whatnot.
Okay.
They didn't come out. They wanted to sit in the sand. So I kind of made the decision that I'm going to keep them in a rack system. And they want to sit in the sand and they don't come out. And, you know, I know a lot of people want to do UVB for them, and I think it is not one of the worst things to offer it to them. But I can tell you right now, I've never seen them come out in the daylight when I had them, unless there was a pressing issue where they needed that heat at that moment. And it
Right.
seems like they have done better, fattened up, and they're just more lively being that way. So being in a tub setup where the heat gets retained and they stay like that, they were easy. The Egyptian tortoises they actually do better with a little bit of a winter cooling period. Not
Okay.
hibernation. But they are a fog desert tortoise to where during the summertime they bake, it gets hot,
Okay.
but once that fog rolls in the morning and it cools down, they zoom
Right.
around there. And as the wintertime temps have come into, and they're actually on the people part of the house because my girlfriend and I both enjoy them, and we wanted to be able to watch them grow. But it still
Sure.
gets a little cooler up here.
Yeah.
And as it's getting cooler, they are just constantly like running around in circles, hunting or not hunting, grazing and looking for food.
Sure.
So they fit into that niche enough to where it wasn't problematic heat wise. The pancakes were a selfish move. They are weird tortoise that I was going to make any accommodation needed to take care of them. That is 100% a. This is not.
They're cool.
Yeah, this is not going for my collection plan, but it's a squishy tortoise that's flat. That's weird, you know. But the tortoises and some of those animals that are warmer weather, it's easier to justify because they go outside in the summer and the spring.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
in the heat of the summer, the basement stays cool and they're outside in the 110-degree heat, soaking it up, loving it.
Yeah. Yeah. We're same way. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sulcatas and all that. Just go outside. Yep.
yeah. And then in the wintertime, I've got enough room in the basement to where, part of the basement's more of the Asian species of newts where um, they don't bake, they don't get hot or anything, but they don't get as cold as like the European newts, the Middle Eastern newts do, or they
Sure.
don't need to get as cold. So they're just kind of shifted toward that direction in a stock tank with two pretty high-powered lights during the day, to where it's not really heating anything up too much, but it's also not being counteracted by the south-facing part of the basement, where it just gets all that cold air is getting sucked in at the
Right.
basement windows. So.
Okay. Very cool. So with your collection kind of in its current state, um, how do you see that progressing? Are you kind of chilling out, letting things raise up, and then because I know you were saying that as the amphibians mature, you're thinking more planted and a little more complicated on the enclosure side. So that's going to be more usually means more work, so more time. Um, and so is that? Are you just kind of sitting where you're at, and then as things mature, you'll progress to more complicated enclosures? Or are you trying to add other things, or how are you sitting with that?
Um, for the most part, I'm pretty happy with the way the collection sits. There are I want to say there's three species in my mind I'd like to add. There's not a pressing issue though. There's no, like oh my, I can tell you right now, the reason so many salamanders happen so fast is because I knew I liked them, but there was that potential issue of the interstate transport ban from the
Yep,
lazy of salamanders. So
for
it
sure.
became a matter for me last year of I'm going to buy all the salamanders I can that I know I want. I'm going to raise them up. I'm going to work with them, and if something is not working out to where just not feeling it, I've got some other hobbyists in the state that I can just work with to say, hey, would you like this? Really wasn't doing it for me like I thought it was. I'm glad I got the experience, but I'm happy to pass it along to you. Um,
Sure.
Nowadays, though, I kind of have what I want. I'd like to get probably next summer. I miss having Odura Castle Nowie. They were one of my favorite geckos of all time. I sold them and my Odura Manilis off when back in those gecko years where it seemed like, man, 2012 to 2016, it seemed like geckos were everywhere and everybody was breeding them. And I thought I'll get them again, you know, when I'm in a more stable part of my life. Man, they're gone. It baffles me how they're gone. And I want them back
Yeah.
just because I never thought that they would go that way. I never thought they would be one of the species that vanished, especially because I'm not a morph guy, but they did have the amelanistic, so I figured that would be a little bit of an extra thing to keep them around. Dead
Hmm.
wrong on that. So I really like them. Uh, Eublepharis angrimayu. My goodness, there's something about a weird giant leopard gecko. Uh, you know, my, I started in herpiculture, or was introduced to it when I was a kid, when my dad had like 20, 30 leopard geckos. So there's that little inkling of, I
Yeah.
miss that childhood feeling, but I want something that's big and weird and lanky looking. And I'd like to, once we're out of Wichita, get a couple turtle species. Wichita's got some weird turtle laws that I'm kind of looking
Okay.
into right now. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with the way it is. And I'd like to just grow it up and start doing some better naturalistic enclosures. Or just not, even if it's not naturalistic, just decking it out to where it's better for the animals. For some of my animals, I'm just making like reed stacks out of tile towers and PVC tubes to
Sure.
make glassing a little easier. Um, or just things like that. Really, I'd like to fix things up, do bigger or better planet tanks for right now.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. The some of the things like utilitarian or what have you, like, dude, reed stacks have been around forever. Since Frank showed them off on on the forums on Kingsnake, and probably long before that, when he, I'm sure, swiped that idea from somewhere. Um, but like, there's a reason those things persist. Like, they're incredibly effective. Um, and yeah, so it's one of those things where, like, however you accomplish that, like, it is it is such an effective parameter, or a set of parameters to offer to your animal, that it like, who cares? Like, yeah, I stacked it up with some bricks and some 1x2, or like, I don't
Yeah.
care, whatever. Like, it is it's the best way I can think of for lizards and stuff to cram themselves in these layers to
Yep.
bask. So that's what they're getting. Like, I don't care if it looks like a hodgepodge craft project. That's because it basically is a hodgepodge craft project. Um, yeah, I've never really understood that. I have to get this thing because it's a resin log or whatever. Like, dude,
Yeah.
it's fine. You can just go get some tubing from Home Depot. Nobody cares. Um, but no, that I agree with you about the geckos, and especially the run that geckos had for a little while there, where the geckos that are not cresties and leopards had quite a bit of a run, and still do, but it's much more concentrated with the groups of people that keep them. Um, I was very surprised by that, because I thought, and still do to some extent, but I don't know exactly where it's going. Um, Twofold. or actually, there's a couple of tendrils off that, but like I thought those little geckos and the weird Australian stuff and things like that were going to progress to be bigger
Mhm.
because I my assumption and why I like them um, is I enjoy the dart frog style of keeping where it's because I came from the saltwater side
Yeah.
and I don't mind not touching stuff. Like I like just can watch it do lizard stuff and I'm fine with that. Um, and so I thought that's the direction that was going. You know, viper geckos and all these little tiny geckos and island geckos and all these different things. And the whole point was just like dart frogs or chameleons and some other things. If you just set it up, it looks super cool, and then you just watch it do tiny lizard stuff. Um, and for whatever reason, it just didn't seem to catch. I don't really know why that didn't seem to catch on like I thought it would. But then there were like a couple of different weird tendrils, like eubliferids.
Mhm.
Leopard geckos were the jam. Still kind of cool, but now people sort of poo-poo it because it's a newbie thing. But then somehow African fat tails didn't explode, even though they have morphs. And then now there's there obviously have always been other eubliferids, but now those other eubliferids are available to us. And so it's like, well, it turns out there's a ton of really weird leopard geckos from a bunch of places that are not safe to go get them, but we can we can enjoy them here. And so like that had a weird resurgence, or where it's like leopard geckos are cool, and then there's these other eubliferids, so that kind of keeps it cool. But then what about these 1,300 other species of gecko that like now we have lights and substrate and all these cool things that we stole from the dart frog and fish people to keep them, and they just kind of everybody's got to have a stropherus because they're really expensive, but like what about all these odura? I have a pair of odura oviceps in my collection that I won at an auction for NARBC with the US ARC, and it's the coolest thing ever. Like it's just a single animal. It just does its own lizard life. um Super cool. You could never touch it. It hates people. It will run, like it's
Yeah.
um yeah, I don't know how that kind of missed the boat. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was quite the bummer. From the simple fact that I always anticipated going back to geckos. So when I took that little break, um, I always thought like, oh, I'm gonna go back. They're gonna be there. Not a big deal. So when I started looking around and like Teratoscincus robrowski, oh man, I missed those things. They are so cool. That gone. I have not seen a single one for sale in the past 2 years that I've been looking. I think one came up for sale once, and I financially was just like, I can't get a new gecko right now. I missed that one, but still,
Well, and that's the other thing. Some little geckos have big price tags.
a lot of them.
That is a factor.
And I think it blew my mind when I saw some Odura the other day for sale. I'm like, wow, that was not that expensive a couple years ago. Not that not that the price is a big problem, but it just was like, wow, times have changed and I am out of touch. Or Homophilus. Oh man, I love Homophilus. I actually gave my group of Homophilus and Blazodactylus to Clint Reinhardt when I was kind of getting away from geckos. I'm like,
Super good, dude.
I'm like, yeah, Clint's gonna do it up. He's gonna take care of them. And I got some back from him, and I got some. He was lucky and nice enough to hook me up with some babies. And I saw some for sale the other day, and I was like, "This was a." I remember when I was looking into getting into them. Somebody that imported told me that she thought I was messing with them because I wanted to buy like 8 or 10 at the time. They're like, don't mess with me. Nobody wants these things. Why do you want them? And I saw, I think, a pair for sale for $250. I'm like, wow. I didn't think they'd have that popularity, and come to find out, they're just not around anymore. There's no imports, so
Right.
prices are just slowly going up.
Sure. And it's one of those things where um, Eric was saying here in the chat,
Hmm.
A lot of oddball gecko keepers picked up pairs and trios of each species rather than work with larger populations of each, which fractured the populations. Um, I yes, I see that. Um, and that is a weird thing that we kind of discount in herpetoculture. Some of the folks that I have been lucky enough to interview, they keep in that manner. You hear Eric Haycraft and Frank Payne and these different guys that work with a variety of lizard species. When they speak about things, they're talking about groups of 10 and 20 and 30 individual animals, and then, figuring out breedings and literally making trees and lineages and crazy things. Um, but from a project perspective, you kind of have to, like, that's especially for these things that we can't get more of. It starts to be, that us, of course, Australian python nerds, the Nick Muttons of the world. He's famous for that. I know this great grandpa for this snake or whatever. And people who wouldn't be into that part of the hobby are like, okay, that's cool. Like, they're thinking corn snake, ball python, genetic morph side, where I need to know what mom and dad are to know what baby will look like, so on and so forth. Whereas these guys are talking about inbreeding depression,
Hmm.
you know, keeping bloodlines, and it's a whole other conversation, right? And I don't know. It feels like maybe lizards lagged behind that a little bit because we had leopard geckos and people were literally breeding leopard geckos in warehouses, right? And just crazy numbers of lizards, and crested geckos went that way, and bearded dragons went that way, and we are starting to see it with bearded dragons and crested geckos, but we didn't, see weird inbreeding depression things and oddball stuff for quite a long time, and so I think that maybe made people feel a little safer of just being like, well, little tiny geckos, and I can just set up an exo with a trio.
Hmm.
Cool. And I'll make a couple, and then I'll hold back one or two and just keep my little tiny side project going. And then you lose one because of it got cold, and then the power went out that one year, and now you don't have them. And there never was a person in reserve that had 50. because because they're weird. They're it's only two nerds on YouTube speaking in Latin that knew what you were talking about for Hermophilus, and then we happen to know the one guy Clint who keeps weird plants like that. you know but there just was never a 50 pack of these geckos at some dude's garage. And yeah, you had a lot of weird drop off like that, but then I don't know, like I don't necessarily think it's a negative when you talk about the price point. It kind of sucks because
Yeah.
I'm into it, and it's like, man, I don't want to pay more because you guys are into it. Like, I've been into it the whole time. Like there's no like original dude discount. um
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but it is one of those things where like most of that stuff is not, you know it's not like a random pet purchase type animal, so I don't really mind the price tag being a little higher, because if not that you can't, but if you bought an exo and bought a setup and bought the gecko at a show and took it home, you would struggle with the vast majority of those species to get it to survive. And
Mhm.
they're just a little more involved. So I'm not against that price tag making you think about it a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I didn't mean to make it sound like I thought the price tag was a bad thing. More just a change of the
Oh no,
time.
I'm totally fine with that because I don't have unlimited money and I want
Yeah.
unlimited geckos. So I get it.
um, more, I think in some levels it does make people rethink the animal, or makes it go like, oh, it's a little expensive. I kind of want that, which I mean
True.
could
Yeah.
be a good or bad thing. Um, but I think it may be a little better than the, oh, that's $10. I'll get it later. Not a big deal. I'll do it. I'll do it
Right.
later.
Right.
But yeah. Oh, sorry, my cat's screaming in the background.
I was
Uh,
gonna say I saw some jumping once or twice back there.
yeah. So I think I think Eric is right, and I was totally one of those guys. I was like, I'm gonna get all the geckos. I want to put them all in my room, and I think yes, I think the biggest issue is that people don't keep in those big numbers, and I think it's hard because I do think there's people like myself that want to work with a little bit of everything, but then you got to rein it in because if you're going to keep that project going, you really got to keep that population healthy.
Right.
Good example would be with my diamond pythons. It's not just a pair; it's a Lazic bloodline male, two San Diego Zoo animals, two Valle female or animals. That way you can mix and match the bloodlines and try to
Yeah.
keep that genetic population healthy. And I think with geckos, it was just a matter of I got my trio, they pumped out 20 eggs. Oh, male died.
Right.
Okay. Which I can't be one of those people. I need to have like numbers. And even I need to have like I better get like when I was getting newts, it was a problem where I'm like, well, I kind of like blue swordtails. All right, better get 9. That seems like a good starting number.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or Spanish rib newts. Well, I'll get a pair. Nah, let's get 6. And it's a little bit of cheating with amphibians because they can, pop out 200, 300 eggs. So
Yeah. True.
bought
Yes.
bought 4 firebelly toads, and now I think I sold 120 last year, and
Wow. That's awesome.
now I've got 8 new ones that I'm raising up. So oh look, the population's now bigger, and I can trade with other people. Whereas with
Very
geckos,
cool.
it was that number of okay, it's 16 eggs maybe for some species, and if they're a temperature sex determined species, you get heavily skewed on one sex, and the other sex kind of vanishes, or like Eric
Yeah.
says, a
True.
collection, and nobody keeps them around. Somebody was just asking for on Facebook. Somebody asked about was it spider geckos?
Mm-hmm.
Made me realize like I couldn't believe that they had actually gone. I knew they were gone, but it was that moment of, oh yeah, I haven't seen one for sale in like 12 years. Like
Right.
that's really weird. And then my boss just reminded me the other day. He's like, "Yeah, I had one animal and never could find a mate, and it just sort of vanished."
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
wow.
and there's also like the different facets of our hobby. Like tortoise folks and iguanids and different things and snake folks for the most part. Like talking about incredibly long lived things. Whereas when you get into lizards, it's so highly variable
Mhm.
of, some varanids, yeah, a long time, some iguanids, yeah, a long time. Agamids, total crapshoot. Like
Yep.
way species dependent on whether or not you get a big lifespan. And once you get into small stuff or you get weird like chameleons, then it
Oh,
gets
man.
super weird. Are you a veiled chameleon where your breeding style is cockroach and you just make because we don't we don't ever, some folks do. I'm generalizing, but we don't take that into account. Like your veiled chameleon is supposed to grow to 11 inches in 1 year and die, and
Mhm.
then the 150 babies that it made do it next year, and on and on. And we we obviously don't want to do that as pet keepers. We want to give them a nice life, and they are physiologically capable of living longer than that. But once they hit the downhill, right,
Mhm.
geriatric off a cliff, of course. And then all these little tiny animals, like insects, are incredibly successful.
Yep.
Maybe we should do what insects do and also eat them. Like, so they do. Like, are you really tiny? Make a lot because you're bird food. And like that's we don't ever really, some folks do that get far down the natural history nerd hole like the rest of us, but like those are all things that we discount and don't take into account of like all of these things that made super cool pets. And it's like, oh yeah, crested geckos and anything from that part of the world. Yeah, they eat baby food. Well, no kidding. Like what? Of course. Like they live a pretty good time. You know, they're an island species. Turns out they eat each other. That's how you regulate populations, so you can
Mhm.
live a long time. If you're a leachianus, you can get gigantic. Just eat crested geckos. Like
Yeah.
that's you know we don't think about a lot of those things, and then you see the facets of the hobby that do, and that's kind of what I was trying to get at
Mhm.
before, and I don't think I really said it the right way. Of I thought the mentality for dart frog people would be better adopted by gecko people of with a lot of dart frogs it's very difficult to get importation. Things are endangered, and a lot of different rules and things. Amphibians starting to get really weird all over the world with all
Mhm.
sorts of issues that are affecting amphibians. And so the serious people in that part of the hobby are producing things, and they usually have dedicated setups, dedicated rooms. This part of the world, are you an obligate person? Do you like big stuff or small? Like they get way in the weeds with their stuff. But that's also why you can go to a a show and find like the three people who are into dart frogs, and get every dart frog you've never heard of from every river in the Amazon, you
Yeah.
know, because they are so dedicated and have, this is the reserve population. It's at Sally's house. All she does is keep blue frogs, or whatever. And that's how they've been able to sustain it. Um, and I don't, we didn't like get over the hump or something. We
No.
we didn't like Sally's the blue frog person and like Jim's the viper gecko guy, and we just never got a Jim. I don't know what like, and it was weird because the setups, the equipment, the planted tank, all of those things seem to fall in line where it's like, okay, instead of putting 1.2 orange frogs in there, you could put 1.2 of these yellow faced whatever the hell geckos and just do the same thing. And I don't know, it was a
Yeah.
strange transition.
I don't know whether it's just the type of person, you know, and I don't mean that in a negative way. Just maybe the dart frog people, there is something wired in your brain that you fit into that niche of
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
frogs.
absolutely.
I like, and then when it came to the gecko people, there was the I like the geckos, but I'm gonna get that another gecko next year. I'm gonna get that other gecko. And I know I was, I
Sure.
just as much as
Sure.
and I don't know what it was. But yeah, I agree with you. I really thought we were gonna end up with a situation of like, oh, Joe Schmo has got all the Europlatists and he's doing really well with them. And man, it seems like Europlatists, as an example, are kind of gone. Like not gone to the same level as other geckos. They're still around in some numbers, but not in the way they used to be, and not in the way
Sure.
that I wish there was some way that we could like teleport back in time to the hobby and go like, get it all, breed it all, keep it. But I also wonder if maybe this is a thought I have every once in a while, and maybe it's not a great thought to have. Is what if some of those animals go out of the hobby for a reason, and we
Yes.
we look back on it fondly and go like, oh, those were so cool, but maybe they didn't catch on for a good reason. There was reproductive
Yeah.
rate was crappy, or there was only one guy in 60 that had success with them.
So Eric Burke, he's on the Morelia Python
Mhm.
Radio podcast. He mentions this thought that you're talking about very often, and he's very specific when he says, he's like, some things aren't in captivity because they suck. Like, because, like, and to his point is, he grew up and his dad had a very diverse collection,
Mhm.
and he's thinking about, when he says that, he's usually talking about large species,
Mhm.
large monitors, large pythons, things like that, so on and so forth. And he's like, yeah, it's terrible. They bite or they claw, or like nobody wants to get beat up by an iguana or whatever. But it doesn't have to be that extreme. but yeah, your idea is spot on. Of like some things went out of vogue and it just wasn't as cool or whatever. But some things like well, they wouldn't have any babies and then they got old. So now
Yeah.
we don't have any more. Like they were, super specific or really difficult or, just didn't produce because the person who thought they were cool lived in Boston and they needed to be very arid or whatever the case may be. Um, and yeah, not everything will breed in a shoebox in Illinois, but that's why corn snakes are super popular because they will. Like there is something to be said for that for sure.
Or like dragon snakes. That's the one I always think of where
Oh yeah,
everybody's like, yeah, dragon snakes. That one guy, one place, scented frogs, or sorry, scented panks with frogs, and he sewed the frog inside of it, and it's eating on its own now. It's only been 14 months, and like, come on, like, what are we doing? Like, it's a cool experiment to be able to be like, I tried dragon snakes, did not work. We
right.
shouldn't do it.
Well,
And that's an extreme example on the
well, but
paradigm.
here's my thing though. I think because I actually I just put an order in with Reptilinks, oddly enough. Um, I I do love the fringe people like that
Mm-hmm.
because um uh, what is it? Northern Lights Reptile Importers or something is the Canadian version, and I think Ivory Exotics is the American. They're partner companies.
Okay.
Um, they import super weird animals, and they keep them in decked out, amazing setups, and they've been really successful with weird snakes. And it's because they use things like Reptilinks, and um, Reptilinks are being made with iguanas, which are an invasive species in Florida.
Sure.
Turns out maybe that's easy to get and make a little bit of sausage out of. We breed bullfrogs for people food, so we get, there are some options there. Um, Owen McIntyre and quite a few other people who do reptile podcasts are talking about rhino rats and different things and using fish to get them started. Just oddball stuff. Um, but those fringe weirdos are, you know, dragon snakes will never be mainstream. And they probably shouldn't be mainstream. But in what I do to educate and show the public, or maybe on the zoological side, or if you are a particularly dedicated person who has the funds and the time and so on and so forth to do like a dart frog style, right?
Oh,
Really into it, planted, lights, mister, on and on and on. Well, if you can do that and then get reptilinks or get a frog source or so, and then a dragon snake. All right, cool. So like the six of us idiots that are willing to do that can do, but it that's like progression. I mean, like Western hognose snakes are incredibly popular in the United States right now as a pet. I think that's a little insane because I'm a paranoid person when it comes to epistoglyphs and rear fangs and so on and
oh,
so forth.
sure.
But from a keeping perspective, we've bred them now and they eat pinkies and are doing what and you have to regulate it and there's some adjustments you need to make and what have you. But that's awesome. It turns out we can do that because we started out using frogs and progressed and on and on and on. Easterns and Southerns are actually way better looking. They get bigger. They're so much cooler, but they basically never transition to rodents. That's why it's terrible. And it's like, well, what if we talk to the Reptilinks folks? What if we talk to a bullfrog? Like, that fringe progression type of thing um, can be super cool, but it's one of those deals where like yourself, and you talked about Clint and Eric is here in the chat and these different people where on the tiny gecko front that started this entire giant tangent I'm now talking on, um, you we don't have crested gecko, leopard gecko, ball python, bearded dragon, corn snake numbers of people,
Yeah.
and so we can't really scale out a marketplace Like there are some people that breed geckos and oddball geckos and what have you, and they do okay. And prices are a little higher, and in markets and economics and blah 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 for reptiles. But what I have seen uh, through doing the podcast and things, and how I end up talking to folks like yourself, is these small pockets of people don't really care about that. And a little bit of it is by requirement. They kind of can't care about
Yeah,
that, because if you want your geckos to continue and you want to keep these things, then no one will buy them. Then you have to trade them with your friends or give them to your buddies, or there's only a handful of us that think it's cool, so we'll just collectively keep them going ourselves. And you know some one or two guys bit the bullet and paid some money and got these things, and then babies showed up, and it's like, well, I can't keep them all, and nobody really wants to buy them, but you get it, and you think that they're cool,
yeah,
and you are interested in helping me with the project, and I know you're actually going to do it, and are a responsible person, that kind of thing. There's some sort of personal relationship there. And so people are just kind of giving each other, and like, yeah, man, zebra skinks are cool. Like, pass me two, and I'll give you some of my pelagic geckos, and we'll figure it out, or whatever. It,
sure.
it's much more. It's much more what I think of when I think of old school herpeticulture, which is dudes in a Waffle House parking lot trading king snakes.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
always like you hear Trumbauer and all these guys that were like, yeah, we weren't actually dealing drugs, but it looked like we were dealing drugs because it was the 70s, and I had like a bag with some snakes in a parking lot, and it was a sketchy van, because it was some guy who surfed in the one place in California that they had brown king snakes, and I might have bought him drugs to give me a king snake, like that's 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 kind of where we're at now, of like, I literally am sitting next to pelagic geckos, um that Dylan and some guys were just telling me about, and they're like, oh yeah, this dude brought them in, and they're pretty cool, you should check it out, and now I have them. And it's just a buddy thing, and I don't know, like, I think it's super cool. It's a little bit by necessity, right? Because we can't charge hyper orange fat tail prices because no one wants to buy them. Um, but I don't know. I think that it's maybe a little more fragile, but I think that has the potential to maybe keep those species around longer, because we aren't as likely to just stop thinking crested geckos are cool. Like,
Oh,
because
sure.
like those folks, they're not, they don't get it. You know what I mean? And they're not bad. They enjoy their pet. They beardy moms. I think they're the greatest thing ever, because they spend a bunch of money on bearded dragons, and then the people who make all that stuff make me better lights for my stuff. And
Yeah.
I just, but they wouldn't understand the conversation where we had, where it was like, what if we made an 8x4 decays snake enclosure? And
Yeah.
they're like, you're such an idiot. And it's like, hear me out. You know what I mean? But the
Yeah,
reason that we could do that is because a million ball python nerds made it so that we could get cool snake lights or whatever. But then
sure.
it would just be like me and you in the back of the Emporia Zoo in Kansas, just building this stupid enclosure for decay. You know what I mean? Like, that's but that's the only way it would happen. You know?
Yeah, and perhaps I should have picked a different species, because I actually don't know how dragon snakes are doing in captivity these days. Um,
No, but
yeah,
that
no,
that made perfect sense.
yeah, like the fringe group style of stuff is, I love it. I love being able to be like, hey, Joe Schmo, you breed that one gecko. Can I trade you, six of these for
Yeah.
two of those? Like, yeah, let's do it. Um, yeah, it just, I think what the hardest part is when that one or two people that are just doing awesome with it, and they've hooked up their buddies, and their buddies are raising them up, and that person sells it all out, or the animals all die suddenly, and then you're left with nothing. And I guess I
Yeah, I
shouldn't.
mean,
I
yes,
guess
it's still a hobby, so
yeah.
life happens for people. Yes, for sure.
Oh, and that's not a knock on them. That's more of a, perhaps that's the hobby's way of saying that those 6 people really knocked it out of the park and they did awesome and they deserve accolades in the hobby for their efforts. But unfortunately, it was not meant to be
Yeah.
in the long term.
Yes.
And it's a cynical look, but
No, I don't think so.
yeah.
So I have I've now actually done a whole bunch of podcasts, but um in these podcasts I have talked about this hobby, like an artistic hobby, and I always use woodworking as an example, right? And if you started out whittling with a kid, like with your grandpa, and you sucked at it because you're a kid, when you're 50 and have been doing it this entire time, you're probably like a world class artisan, right? But if you don't go on Facebook and show people, they'll never know, right? You just have like insane wooden bowls and crap in your house because you have this skill. I I think that this is that way, and or can be, I suppose, in like progression of skill and these different things. But I think that what you just described um, is sad and awesome. And what I mean by that is when you said that it's like these, so it's me, you, and Eric and Mike, and we did something cool with pelagic geckos here on my table, and nobody really cared, and it was cool in the esoteric way of we posted pictures on Instagram, and a bunch of people were like, "Oh my god, like you guys are killing it, good job." You know, I don't really want to keep them because they're brown and from the Solomon Islands. I don't really care, but cool, good, great. Um, and then they don't live that long, and they faded out, and now we don't have them anymore. That that sucks that we don't have them anymore, but it's awesome that we did this thing, and like the accolade part never really comes. We don't really have a structure like that. Like we sort of do for social media, but that we're not really organized in that way,
Sure.
like her pediculture. Um, but I like the way things in her pediculture are now. I think the podcast platform, or I hope, because I like doing it
Oh,
and
sure.
I've been doing it. I hope that this platform, I don't know, like this is the sappy nerd side of it for me, is I hope that platforms like this are that, of where like the Morelia Python Radio, right? They're like 500 episodes deep and they've had crazy like authors and progression of things, and like they're literally an archive of what has happened in Australian pythons and herpetoculture kind of as a whole
Sure, sure.
in the last decade. It's crazy. And nobody but like 50 snake nerds cares. But to those 50 snake nerds, that's a super big deal, right?
Yep.
And I think kind of like what you were describing is this stuff. Like there are very few people in the world that care that you produce zebra skinks, right? Which sucks because it's cool. But the reason it's awesome is because the very small group of people that know that it's cool think it's really cool. Like it's just so much more important. Like I don't know you, and I sought you out to come talk to you and hang out with you and preserve it forever and show it to the 7 people who are watching right now because I think it's really cool. I was seriously impressed with that because I know how cool they are, and I don't have enough experience with them myself, so I really wanted to hear about your experience, and then you shared it, and then you're going to move on in 5 years and not have them, and that will suck. But it was so awesome that you did that. You know what I mean? I don't really know how to say whatever the hell it is I'm
No,
trying to
no,
say, but like it's
I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying.
and I've said it in quite a few episodes, but like that this is kind of how my guests have been progressing. Of it's these small groups of super cool people, and not cool in the like popularity sense of the word, cool as in like we're all the same social group, we just didn't know it. You know what I mean? Like Eric and them knew enough to come here and comment about specific parts of your collection. Like they clearly know about you and know about your collection. And I didn't until I saw you on social media and then I wanted to talk to you. But I know Eric and Christian has been here a bunch of times and Mike always shows up. And so now I found you. And so now you're in the bubble and you're stuck. I don't know if you knew that or not, but you are.
All right.
And but that's awesome. And that's like that. This sounds conceited, but I don't want it to. That's the accolade. Like that's the preservation and the. It's not really an attaboy, but like that's the attaboy you get for breeding zebra skinks. Is we all will remember that, and we all know that, and it really only matters to a handful of us anyway. And so that's how it gets preserved, and like that's the accolade you get, is that to all the people that care about this, really big deal. Sucky side is there's only like 10 of us.
Yeah.
You know, and it I don't know, that was a really long-winded sappy thing, but
No,
like
what?
that's I love the idea of what you said. I just think that we are accomplishing it in a way that people don't expect or necessarily equate what we're doing or what's happening. I think in this social media Facebook age of being a human, which is weird anyway, we don't humans are doing that less, right? Like the one of the largest gatherings of humanity in recorded history was when the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup the last time. And it's like, that's super cool. That's an amazing, stupid human fact. Really? Really? The largest gathering of humanity in recorded history for humans. Like 250,000 years of monkeys that can talk to each other. And the largest gathering of monkeys that can talk to each other was because 23 guys were really good at hockey. That's so weird. Like people are weird, right? Like, and then we distill all the way down to like the people that give a crap about lizards to listen to this podcast, and it's like, and this is our Zebra King Cup winner guy, like, you know, and
I got you.
you know, like that's, I don't know. The summation of that is that people are weird.
Well, and and that
And
that was
Eric says we've got a secret meme group. Yes, that is the culmination. The culmination. It's not religion, folks. George Carlin was right. The culmination of human beings in social interactions is secret meme groups. That's what it is. That's my philosophy of lizards today. Now, and it like that's yeah. It's I don't know. It's important to the people that it's important to. Is a so much more succinct way of saying all the crap that I just said. But yeah, that's if you don't sign off with thanks a lot, I'm going to be disappointed.
all right, Eric.
That
I'll do it
seems
just
like
for you.
I feel like that's a T-shirt that either
Thanks a lot.
should exist. Oh, and so now we have a guy who makes T-shirts. So Eric, we can make that
Oh,
happen. Check it
there you
out. We
go.
actually have multiple T-shirt guys. Justin is trying to take over the T-shirt throne from Billy. So we will see. There should be a T-shirt cannon fight. I feel like that's how that should be established. That's just my
Absolutely.
opinion. So yeah, that was a huge philosophical rant. I apologize for
No,
that.
no worries. No worries.
But that all of that was to somehow come back to your actual collection of no, I wrote that in the episode blurb about how I love people that give oddball things their due. And I think that is, or it seems to me that that is what you were doing. You found a niche to excel with things that do well in the cold. You had some outliers of Egyptian things, but then you had the natural history knowledge to be like, yeah, it's Egypt, but it's a fog desert. And then the fact that you're smart enough to know what a fog desert is probably means you know how to keep those things. Just I and I don't discount the fact that you work in the zoological profession, providing you, and honestly, probably requiring, I would assume, due to the level of education you have to have in your profession, esoteric natural history knowledge
Yes.
has to be of interest to you in order for you to excel in your career. And so it only makes sense that it would bleed over into your hobby. I don't just keep a desert tortoise, it's a fog desert. And this is why it makes sense and fits in my house and my basement of weird newts. And, those things, it makes perfect sense that oh yeah, I had some outliers. And it's like, dude, no, you don't. It's not you knew enough to know it was a fog desert. It's not an outlier. You're very good at this. Um, yeah, I don't know. Was very impressed with your collection, and I was very happy that I found it. Um, and I don't have a further point than that.
I'll say the hardest part of that was, and the hardest part of having a collection of the oddball stuff is knowing when to get rid of it. And I don't mean that in a happy way of like, I'm bored, time to get rid of it. But like, when you messaged me at first, you asked about, can you talk about Matoa Toa? And I would have loved to, but I gave mine to Matt Schaefer because I felt like I was no longer doing well with them with the change of setup. I didn't want to. I love
Fair.
those things. They are one of my favorite geckos of all time. But it just felt like after having a bunch of success and doing well, after the move, the eggs they're always infertile. I wasn't getting little babies coming out of the crevices and, joining the adults. And if the babies did hatch, it seemed like they weren't thriving like they used to.
Right.
I just think it was, I wish I could have those animals back. And I think that's the other part. But I mean, I can't. It's not set up for them. It's not good for them.
See, but don't you think that that's a level of keeping right there? Is knowing that? Like I think that it would take a higher level of awareness and ability, excuse me, to recognize that in your house that doesn't work. You know what I mean?
Yes, and actually, I do have to make an amendment. They also went to Clint, not Matt. Matt got some other animals. But yes, it's true. It's still that feeling of it's a bummer when you've got an animal that is oddball.
Yeah, sure, for sure. Yes,
you got to make the call for the good of the species. If you want it to thrive, you got to send it up to people that have that set up to be able to just crank them out. And I know the two guys that got them from me are going to pump them out and do well. It's just still a matter of kind of feeling a little. I guess sometimes you just feel like you wish you could do it all, and it's always a sad thing to watch it leave.
Yeah, for sure.
Because then you have that moment where you're like, oh, I did used to have that cool thing. Am I, and we've already discussed it, but there's those little moments that come in your head of like, am I part of the problem? Why that species vanished? And you gotta remind yourself like, nah, circumstances change. You gotta unfortunately move along.
For sure.
Let the species do what it can to its best of its abilities to attract people to it. Unfortunately for Matoa Toa, I don't know how well they'll do in captivity going forward. I mean, their common name, one of them is the ghost geckos because you never see them. They're like, they just dart around the foliage really quick, and it's a small gecko that looks exactly like a salamander but lives in a desert. It's a weird little thing that unfortunately probably isn't going to be here in a couple decades, but it's at least exciting to give it that opportunity and know that it was fun and cool to work with when it was here.
So I think that is a very specific example, and I know we're coming up on 2 hours.
Yes.
So I won't make further examples past this one. Um, um, that is one of those things where, in talking to you, I think you see crossover of your profession and your hobby, because my collection, the bulk of our collection is to use for educational shows. That's what they're for. Some of them are pets, but they were chosen because we can tell stories with them, we can teach lessons with them, and they interact well with people. So they're attractable. Nothing's really bitey or flighty. They're pretty chill, which means we use a bunch of North American colubrids, a couple of big derpy Burmese pythons, sulcata, like things that everybody uses in shows for a reason, right?
Sure.
And so it's purpose driven. And then there are parts of our collection where I'm actually a reptile nerd and I like to keep weird stuff. And a lot of the stuff that I grew up liking to keep is big, doesn't like people, and is probably not safe for you to be around when you're by yourself. And I'm a big dude. We help with amnesty for the state in a couple of different rescue avenues and things like that. And stereotypically, the things that come to us are big things you shouldn't have as pets that are not safe. And my wife is a Kansas farm chick who could punch you in the face, and I'm a big old dude. And so people call us and are like, "We have a giant snake. We don't know what to do." It literally happened 2 days ago at 3:30 in the morning when the police in a Chicago suburb didn't know how to handle a boa constrictor in someone's driveway. They called my wife in the middle of the night and she was like, "Yeah, man, put it in a bucket. Let's do this." Like, she's crazy. Um, the correlation I see there for the zoological side is none of the crazy extreme things. Is when you see like, oh, crocodiles or big crazy things or whatever, they don't on the zoo side, it's very rarely a sensational thing. It's a storytelling thing. And like I live pretty close to Brickfield in Lincoln Park, and they have crazy like walk through things, and it's all storytelling, and you're following a character, or it's talking about the preservation of the water cycle, or lots of educational things. And then when you talk about those geckos, and you're like, I don't know if they'll be around, and they're little tiny things that aren't really that popular, but you just list like 7 amazing things of like called the ghost gecko, and they look like a salamander and live in like all like you have super cool descriptors of like, what do you mean they're not that interesting? Like you just said 7 super cool things, like but it's interesting and cool from a natural history perspective, which means you probably had to tell a story about it and somehow present that thing, because just to sit here in your bedroom and look at the enclosure wouldn't really be as fun, because that's not the selling point or what have you. And so it's you see where those things start to come together of like, boy, I bet you could really talk about that at the zoo, or have this skill set. And then, well, I keep this at home, and so I'm trying to explain to people of keeping this gecko for your pet. And it's like, well, turns out some things suck as pets. Like, is it a leopard gecko? Does it come out all the time and it's bright yellow? And like, that's why they're cool, Whereas like that might be cool in a zoological setting because theoretically people could walk by and see it more. But whoa, the story for this thing, and it's so like, this is cool for this cool reason. Like, if you're here, you might see it or not. But I got a poster about this really cool thing. It's just very different. And you can, like, as you've been talking through the interview or through the episode here, like you can hear when you talk about those things, and the way that you talk about things, like you obviously know a lot about natural history, and you the cool thing, like, oh, and it's from this place, or you describe it, oh, it needs this kind of water, and this, like, you have all these facts just sitting there, like, this is why it's so cool. And then the things that you keep, it's like, every person I meet, I have to tell them the story of this newt, and then they will think it's cool. Um, I don't know. I love that. And I think that hearing you talk and hearing you describe those things is to then see, just scroll through Instagram like everybody does, like, oh, what do you keep? This. And then to hear you talk, and actually when you put captions and things on your social media posts are very informative as well. Um, that becomes much more obvious of like, oh, that's why you keep the thing, and that okay, like you can really put those things together. Um, so we are cruising past 2 hours, so I kept you very long. Um,
Not a problem. What a
uh,
pleasure to be here.
yeah, and I that went exactly how I thought it would go because the people that have spoken about you speak very highly of you, and they're all super cool. So I just naturally assumed you would be cool, and you are. Um, but if people want to find you and talk about cold weather newts and all these crazy things, where can they find you to talk about that?
They can feel free to message me on Facebook. They can also message me on Instagram. I'll probably see it first on Instagram, to be honest. I hate the fact that if I'm not friends with you on Facebook, it goes to that folder that I never see. But
Yeah, that way more people are, I think, are using Instagram because of that.
yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at the_nudist. NEWTIST. Note this, not
Yes,
nudist.
be specific.
um,
It's the internet.
yeah,
Google the right thing.
yes, yes, be sure. And I'd be happy to speak newts, pythons, geckos, whatever,
Very
anytime.
cool. Very cool. I am happy to hear it. That was awesome. Mike says, great show. Yes. I was actually hoping some folks like Mike would show up because they tend to follow a lot of the same things that you spoke about. They just follow a lot of those principles with giant stuff. And so I love that as you go throughout the hobby, you can see a lot of very similar themes. But then someone like yourself, handheld size things, smaller things, to go all the way to a guy like Mike, where he literally is building the room type things we were talking about.
Oh, it's very
So
cool.
it's very cool to see the spectrum. Um, yeah, man, I'm so glad you agreed to come on, and then we got to hang out and talk. I cannot wait to see how things progress. I really enjoy seeing your social media posts. I was super jealous of all the zoos that you visited.
Yes.
Um, that was really cool. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
sorry we
man.
didn't have time to talk about that. Sorry about that.
No, I was very happy to hear about your collection. I don't know, and even it sounds weird, and I kind of already said it, but like even watching you post about your trips to the zoos and the different things, like that kind of thing of like the stuff that you thought was cool at those places, like oh, okay, yeah, that jives, like that would make sense that interested you, or the things that you chose to share. You can see that kind of play out of like, well, you're into this and these things, and how that influenced it. I thought that was really cool. um, and you've got a chance to go to a lot of places, so that was really neat. Yeah, so I'm super glad you came on, and I thought it was really great, so I really appreciate
Not a problem. Thank you. And just for Eric, thanks a lot.
it. Awesome. Thank you. All right. That was episode 45. Yeah, man, I meant what I said. I'm so glad he came on. I definitely expected, Eric and all the other folks that recommended him to the show, that it would go wonderfully. His Instagram is super cool. Those zebra skinks are amazing. I am always fascinated by people that are able to keep cold weather things, especially cold weather amphibians. I find that really interesting. And you can for sure see the natural history zoo angle to what he does, and I think it makes him very successful. And so that was really cool. So I encourage you guys to definitely check out his social media, definitely on Instagram. Um, the zoo tours and stuff that he just recently did and posted were really neat. I can't wait to see the zebra skink progression. Watching the social interactions with that is really cool. He posts about that and talks about how the babies are doing different things with the parents. That's really neat. Hopefully, he continues with that project, and we'll see what happens with his other females. And then I really want to see how he progresses with some of his amphibians as he builds those up and does the planted thing. I'm really interested in the fast water, the fast moving water, and how to do setups for that. Because with my son having some different turtle species, we are going to try and set up some things where I think they might need a little bit more riverine type setups as opposed to pond setups. And so I'm always looking for ideas for that. It's going to be really cool. As always, see if I can get my hands to work the right way. Black box cages. Oh, get my hands. There we go. Black box cages. I posted a few videos and different things of the progression of the builds I'm doing for black box. I have moved on to the great foam and dry lock method for the tropical setups, and I will be combining the two. I have two desert setups and two tropical setups for a group of Madagascar lizards, and so I am going to try and show kind of one of each. I was originally using Zilla plant LEDs for all of the enclosures, and I think I'm going to stick with that for the desert enclosures, but I'm not totally decided on that. With the two tropical or forest type enclosures, I actually am probably going to go with Arcadia and use the shorter. Uh, what are they? Jungle Dawn LEDs, I think. I got a little one of those for none of you can see it because it's literally off camera right there. A little indoor greenhouse I have, and I set that up, and those are really amazing lights. And so I want to see how that goes in those black box cages. My wife just brought all of the plants in because it's starting to get cold in Illinois, and we have a very large ground cover, probably 30-inch wide plant. It's a ground cover species from Madagascar, and it's actually starting to flower in the house. So I'm pretty excited about that. My goal is to get two cuttings off of that and do one in each of the tropical setups, and then probably just a generic climbing species. I will likely use pothos, possibly wandering Jew. We're really having a lot of success with growing that at the house, and so I have tons of spare cuttings, and I like the cover. There are more purple hues on that, and the actual plants from Madagascar that we were able to find kind of keep that purple hue theme, and so my assumption is that that maybe will play in the logs and build and stuff. I don't think I'm going to stick with Zoopoxy for that. I may actually go with cork tubes just because I think the geckos are going to do a little bit better with that. I'm kind of still up in the air on how that's going to go with securing it and things like that. I like the idea with the Zoopoxy because it secures to those black box cages really well. If you can see in the video and the picture, I actually took in the entire enclosure and just tilted it on its side after I'd zoopoxied everything in. Stayed perfect, no issues. I was able to get in and do the work that I needed to do. So I'm not worried about the fake trees and stuff that I'm doing in the tropical side staying secure. My thing is, if I ever want to change or move them in the future, I think I'd rather just screw in the cork tubes and just be able to unscrew them as opposed to using the Zoopoxy. I don't want to have to. I don't want it to crack or break once I've already made it. I'm kind of stuck for the desert rock ones that I built, but once I've committed to that size, I'm not that's permanent. Whereas for the tropical ones, if you're just going to do the dry lock background method, Well, that background can kind of be used for anything. You can wipe and scrape everything clean and choose to go desert or tropical or what have you, and just change out your plant structure and things. And so when I'm adding the tree structure to that, I don't think I want that to be permanent. And so I'm leaning more toward cork. I do have several wood pieces in the shop from other builds that I may cut down to fit. So they're a little more temporary, especially when you're talking about the little geckos and things like that. I'm definitely not worried about them destroying, habitat or anything of that sort. They're very little. And so I think I can get away with a little less permanent structure, just secured enough to keep them safe as opposed to being permanently in the enclosure. And so there's a couple of different ways that's going to go. We will see. And we also just recently got some gargoyle geckos into the collection to use for shows. And those are the first gargoyle geckos we've ever had. Indy was setting those up the other day. So that should be really cool. So I will probably post more about those as we go. Like I told you guys, I have guests book until the end of the year. The Herpeticulture Network posts went up for Person of the Year, and their voting is going on for that now. So look on all of the various social media platforms where you can find everything, and you will see all the links to vote for that. I am wearing, you guys can see in the video part of this, the Herpeticulture Podcast shirt from Justin. He has been making tons of cool shirts. Billy, I was making the joke earlier about Billy and Justin both making shirts. They actually both make really cool stuff. They have been providing different shirts for the folks connected to the Herpeticulture Network in some capacity for quite a bit now. This Herpeticulture Podcast shirt is super cool. I went with the green one. I really love this color. Justin has been able to access some really nice shirts and come out with a lot of really cool stuff. If you are pay attention to the social media posts of Jake and Justin and the folks connected to the network, because people talk to Justin about ridiculous shirt ideas, and that is not a guy you want to tempt with a good time, because he has made several of the ridiculous shirt ideas, and some of them have been awesome. And you guys need to be paying attention to when those pictures and things get posted, because they are very funny. He's been making some really cool stuff. So that has been awesome. So yeah, check out all of the various posts for the network. Continue to keep up with Black Box. I've been having a lot of fun with their stuff. And Jake and Justin talk about this quite a bit when they talk about Black Box. That they were buying these long before Black Box ever sponsored the network. Jake and Justin were my exposure to Black Box through the network. And then I went to a show in person with Indy to actually pick up my stuff from them. Got to meet them, see their stuff in person, spitball ideas with them in person. So it's this particular sponsorship is not, I don't know, like it's not corporate. Like we actually know them, and use their stuff. Like it's, I don't know. It's not like your typical podcast sponsor type of thing. They actually are part of the crew. They're super good people. They really do make really awesome stuff. So I'm very happy that we're continuing with that. I wasn't totally sure about how the build was going to go when I switched from Zoopoxy to the Great Foam method. I'd never really used that before, and it was awesome. It worked exactly like all the YouTube people tell you it would work, but you don't know until you do that. And I was really happy to be able to create that inside of the enclosure that they made. It's been a lot of fun, and I am obsessed with the fact that they are really lightweight, but really nicely made. So I can just fling them around and do what I have to do, tilt them up, spray the foam. It makes it so much easier to work, especially when you come from my typical way of things where I make my own stuff. I enjoy the craftsmanship side of that, but it gets very, very heavy, and it does limit the type of work you're able to do. Just logistically, like stuff is just harder. But when you get the modular type of setup with things like Black Box, you cut that weight, but still keep it functional and nice. And it's not light because it's cheap. It's light because it's well built. Um, that has made my life a lot easier in going through the builds for these. And so I think that's a pretty huge selling point for theirs. So I'd encourage folks to check that out. I've been really, really impressed with it. So I will see you guys again in 2 weeks. My next series of 3 guests here, yeah, 3, I think we have to end out the year, are very different from each other, which I think is cool, and are a really interesting group of people. I've hit like a really interesting run of people here that are quite different from one another, and so I've been really having a lot of fun with that, messaging back and forth with folks and lining up guests for who's going to go when. Ended up being really cool. So I think you guys are really going to like it. I was looking forward to this one. I have enjoyed all of them. Honestly, it's been really cool. But it's going to be a pretty neat little run here to end out the year. So I think that'll be really cool. And then in the new year, I actually have a continuation of ideas for at least 3 shows, possibly a 4th, that I have not done before at all, that will be completely different than the stuff I've done up until now. So I think that could be pretty neat, even to transition into the new year. So I have quite a few different things that are coming up that should be a lot of fun. So thanks for hanging out, and I will see you guys again in 2 weeks. Later.